Hi, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi. I'm a fellow at the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. And this week in my Print on China column, I covered a very important issue, specifically from India's perspective, but also it has repercussions for the entire South Asian region as well as for Tibet. That is the groundbreaking ceremony and the starting of the construction of the controversial dam on the lower reaches of Brahmaputra River. So this is said to be the world's largest dam once it's fully constructed. So on July 19th, just a few days ago, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, he presided over this groundbreaking ceremony. So his presence was, of course, one of the important indicators of how important it is for China and how much significance it is actually attaching to this dam. And it didn't take a lot of time. In fact, within hours, Chinese social media strategic community began to talk about it, began to discuss this topic. Of course, this has been in discussion for over a decade now. Uh, be it Indian media, be it Western media or Chinese media, we have seen that this is something that has been in the pipeline for a very, very long time. And in fact, on Weibo, which is a Chinese microblog, social media microblogging website, there was a hashtag that marked the project, which racked over 73 billion views, which is a lot when it comes to a topic with respect to India. Of course, they are framing it as a domestic issue, but the discussion is largely about how India is reacting and what India should do. So, India is absolutely as the central part of this discussion about the repercussions and the external reaction on the dam. Uh, but behind this enthusiasm, behind this celebration of scale, was a deeper narrative. And the narrative was just not about engineering, what was just not about how China is marvelously doing this job, building this dam on a very difficult terrain, but the narrative is also about power. The narrative is also about strategic ascendancy. Of course, China is being seen as a country that is superior, that has the capability as well as the will to do something like this. But what makes it more important and more urgent for us to discuss is the importance of this dam in scale, in scope, as well as agenda. So, just to give you a bit of how, what is the scale of this dam, what is the scale of this project. So, it's called as Medog Hydropower Station, and it is expected to take a decade to build this. And it would cost around 167 US billion dollars, which is a lot for one infrastructure project. And according to the reports, Chinese reports, it will generate roughly 300 billion kilowatt hours per year, and this is actually three times the output of the already existing Three Gorges Dam. So, as in you can imagine the extent and the scope of this project. But in today's geopolitics, infrastructure like this isn't neutral. It isn't just about infrastructure. This isn't just about development. There is an underlying message behind all this, specifically if we look at the narrative that is coming out of China. Of course, the Chinese official line, the official discourse is that this is about development, this is about energy security, poverty alleviation, and regional upliftment in Tibet. And of course, it's about, from the Chinese perspective, it is very much about the domestic development. And of course, there is also this narrative that this is going to help the countries in the region, including India and Bangladesh. And of course, the official language is full of win win phrasing, which is a very common phrase when it comes to China and the bilateral cooperation, how China predicts it to be. And there is a lot of economic optimism. But of course, this is just the Chinese official discourse. But the commentators, the analysts, social media users, and even scholars, they tell a very different story. They tell a more layered story about this. And take Hu Shichin, who's actually a known internet personality who was a former editor in chief of the Global Times. He is actually criticizing the Western media as well as Indian media to not really talk about the significance of that project, not actually appreciate the Chinese side. And he's dismissing concerns about the environmental as well as geopolitical risks that are associated with the construction of such a dam and in such an ecologically sensitive area. And he actually calls the dam as an engineering miracle. And it's a symbol of China's mastery, and it is going to reshape the geography and how China is going to take over the Himalayas. Um, but there are other commentators who are way more provocative than he is, and some are actually accusing India of hypocrisy, because of course India is being cast as a country that is being anxious, reactive, whereas China is a country that is responsible and that is focusing on development. So these commentators and analysts who are actually accusing India of hypocrisy, why? Because they're saying that India building its own dams, and but at the same time it is accusing others, specifically China, of weaponizing water. In fact, some of the scholars and commentators are actually talking about India Pakistan water war. And in fact, there was a commentator who said that India wants to control Pakistan with water, and now if when China is doing the same, it fears that China is actually going to take the revenge from the Pakistani side. So, I think this is the narrative that is actually being promoted, which is actually being discussed within the Chinese online um, uh, platform. So, this is in just about internal rhetoric. We can always disregard it as people who are just sitting behind the screen and talking about it. It actually reflects longer running scholarly views in Beijing. So I think we can't really disregard as something that is just happening on the internet. The strategic community is actually talking about it on similar lines, and this is just not something that we are seeing in the past few days. This has been happening for a decade now. And in fact, over a decade ago, there's a scholar named Ye Lin, and who works at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences as actually the state think tank, the Chinese government think tank in Beijing. And he argued that India cannot really demand restraint from China on transboundary rivers when it denies Pakistan similar rights downstream of India. So, as in, this is not a new thing. This is not something that is happening just after Operation Sindoor. So, this is the discussion that has been happening since 2013 and 2014 in China. So, we can actually see the extent of India, China, Pakistan cooperation, which is actually now dating back to 2014, specifically with respect to this trans boundary river cooperation and water sharing agreement. And then Victor Kao, who is also a very controversial commentator, who is also the vice president of the Beijing based Center for China and Globalization. He was, in fact, more blunt. He has been very blunt on India. And he said that if India uses rivers as uh, leverage, it should also be prepared for reciprocity. And China is, in fact, the one country that could actually uh, make India see what is it is doing to others, specifically Pakistan. So, as in this, these comments that we are seeing from the Chinese scholar strategic community is something that are very uh, full of bitter comments and vengeful, I would say, to say the least. And then there is another scholar who is actually a renowned Chinese scholar, Hu Suishang, who's a senior fellow at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. So he offered a nuanced perspective, and he actually offered an explanation for why China is not really going for a hydro water sharing treaty with India, and why Beijing won't really share any hydrological data with India in a systematic manner, primarily because if China does that, and in doing so, implicitly would mean it is recognizing India's position, India's claims on the territory that are being claimed by China, and this is particularly relevant for Arunachal Pradesh. So, online discussions also highlight the dam's potential dual use. And this is, of course, not just about infrastructure that I've been saying it since the very beginning. And one widely shared post noted a tunnel road within the dam complex that leads directly towards Arunachal Pradesh. And the commentator said that in peacetime it is for maintenance, it is absolutely an infrastructural project, but in the wartime the purpose is obvious, and is it goes without saying that it is definitely going to be more beneficial for China and detrimental to the Indian side. So while the Chinese state frame this as a developmental project, a developmental lead, and beneficial for everyone in the region, everyone within Tibet, the unofficial discourse frames it as deterrence and readiness from the Chinese side. And this dam then is more just about concrete and turbines. It is infrastructure infused with geopolitical intent. It signals confidence in China's ability to shape the environment and the regional order, and that too on its own term. But for New Delhi, this project has been raising alarm. India is just not sitting quietly. India has absolutely registered its concerns with China. Of course, nothing has happened, but it also shows that the building of the dam and whatever China has been doing with Brahmaputra is unilateral. There has been no consultation with India, and there has been no consideration of India's own concerns vis-a-vis the shared river. So for Beijing, it offers multiple gains. Of course, it is about infrastructure. It is definitely going to aid power generation, but it is also about territorial assertion. And as I've already mentioned, there is a lot of strategic messaging that has been going on. And there is a possible use of the infrastructure if there is a war in the future with India. So, of course, the official and even unofficial rhetoric may speak of cooperation at some level, but the underlying current carried both by infrastructure and the discourse, it flows towards dominance and not towards dialogue. And I feel that, and I strongly believe that in this context, India needs to be overly cautious with respect to sharing of water and with respect to whatever is happening in Tibet. This is just not about infrastructure. This is also about reclaiming the territory. This is also about making India more and more nervous and preoccupied with Chinese aggression and with Chinese assertiveness in the region. Thank you for watching.